Hello and welcome to an hour of lively discussion and debate from the inside. Our expert panel of in-house professionals will be sharing their responses to the changes brought about by COVID-19 and giving you their point of view about the future as we emerge into a much changed recruitment landscape post-COVID. Their view is especially valuable because not only are they experts in their field, but they look at the world of recruitment from the inside. Of some of the best known employers in the Leeds and the North. Joanne McBride began her recruitment career at Harvey Nash, moving into internal recruitment at Jet2, and in a move that gave her a fascinating view of both sides of the fence, she progressed during the pandemic to another internal role, sourcing technology and finance professionals at Morrison's in Bradford. Rebecca Layton spent many years at Search Consultancy in Leeds, before tasting internal recruitment at Maybe Hire, and then for the last 18 months has been the resourcing business partner at EMIS Group PLC here in Leeds. Sarah Speechley has been in the recruitment world for over 8 years. After a brief introduction at Manpower, she joined Rebecca at Search, progressing 2 years later to Medical Protection Society, where for the last 5 years she has been responsible for attracting talent across a wide range of MPS departments. And Georgina Bladen learned her craft at Card Factory. Following her degree, she moved into supporting the retail recruitment, later progressing to IT, HR, and commercial. So there is our panel, and we can start by taking a look at how recruitment processes have been changed by the pandemic. Rebecca, this time last year, did you have any notion that we would be sitting having such a discussion as this 12 months on? What did you at that stage think that you needed to prepare for?
I think in short, absolutely not. I think personally, a short stint of maybe home working and then being able to return to the office. And in terms of preparation, I think it was very much driven by each announcement that was made. And we steered our response based on that in the I suppose in the primary stages of everybody moving home. But yeah, we were very much steered by that, I'd say, initially.
Sarah, what did you see coming, if anything?
Didn't see anything coming. I thought that, like Rebecca, that we would be working at home for a couple of weeks, that we'd all just kind of fiddle along for a little bit. We would really have to change our ways of working, and that we'd all be back in the office in, a month's time. And it was almost exciting. It was something different. And here we are a year later, and it's not exciting actually. And we've really had to make some big changes and completely change the way that we work in all aspects.
Well, we'll come on to talk about those changes. That's going to be very interesting to hear. Georgina, this time last year, did you have any idea of what might be coming?
I echo Sarah and Rebecca completely. Had no idea what was going to happen and what was going to come. At that point, I was doing retail recruitment, so I did kind of have an inkling that retail recruitment would stop and I would obviously be moving on to other things. But again, I thought it was going to be 3 weeks where I weren't working or was working on different projects, and then I'd go back to my normal job. 12 months later, I'm in a different job and adapting to obviously being in that new position as well as the working from home situation. But still kind of moving with each announcement. So kind of in the same place that we were last year and kind of moving with Boris's announcements.
Joe, is the answer the same for you? Did you have any idea that recruitment would take the turn that it has and working practices would change as they have?
No, not at all. I mean, last year I was at Jet2, and obviously, like everyone said, everyone's just has to be so active to what the government sort of announced. But from my personal situation, if anybody had asked me at like the start of last year if I was looking for a new role, the answer would have been sort of no. And it just sort of amazing sort of the difference of a few weeks and a few months can make how sort of situations and some companies have sort of changed. So it's been fascinating really to sort of see that journey.
Rebecca, how soon was it after the first lockdown that you realised that recruitment practices were going to have to change? In other words, when recruitment, I suppose, started happening again?
I think so. The first part in terms of process needing to change, I think we were very much still recruiting. So it was more the move to video interviews. There was the practical challenges around gaining candidates' right to work, for example. So I'd say there was some, initially it was more to do with practicality of not being able to meet candidates face to face. And then I think as the situation worsened and we obviously all stayed at home and couldn't meet candidates face to face, I think we've just adapted, and it's been an interesting challenge, and especially roles that are classed as key worker positions that are potentially on site at medical practices, for example, thinking of realistic ways for those to work as well. So again, probably practical to begin with, and then as we realised it was longer term, we looked at kind of the process from start to finish and kind of got creative with how we can still offer that candidate experience, and I suppose the same experience for hiring managers, to make sure we still appoint the right people into positions.
Sarah, did you find that there was a period during which you were firefighting, trying to get around the practical problems, and then it became a process that began to be planned and thought about because it was going to last for longer?
Yeah, I think everybody would have, had to go through that process, because nobody, I don't think anybody was prepared for what happened. So I think everybody will have reacted reactively, to change things like taking identification and onboarding the people that were due to start, as we moved into working from home. And then I imagine we all sort of caught up with ourselves a little bit and started to be able to forward plan. Now we have a completely different onboarding process to what we had last year. So yeah, we've moved from sort of initially just reactive to the situation to now being able to look at sort of the future ways of working, onboarding, assessing, and sort of I think it plays a lot into well-being as well, and making sure that people can manage those processes and people can start with us, and it's sort of not impacting on well-being as well.
When you started developing those processes, did you, as Rebecca's just alluded to, Sarah, think about the experience of the hiring managers in the process?
Yeah, I suppose that, they're our key stakeholders. So from, I guess, the candidate experience and the hiring manager experience underpins everything that we do. So we need to ensure that they're both, that both the candidate and the hiring manager are getting what they need out of the process. I think there was kind of a bit of a balance really between saying to a hiring manager, we can't deliver what you need us to deliver, so you're either going to have to kind of work with us and we can do a bit of a workaround, or you might need to make the decision to just not hire somebody and wait until there's a little bit more certainty on, can this person do this role from home? Can you onboard them? Have you got the resource to train somebody? Because I think the knee-jerk reaction is we absolutely still need that person. We've still got to recruit. We've still got to get them in. But when we sat down and talked about onboarding and training and getting that person up to scratch, it didn't sort of, it didn't often, it wasn't always viable to do that. So there were some decisions that we made, but it was all around just conversations and, trying to support the business as best as we could.
So that the practical issues and the solving of the practical issues in themselves actually impacted recruitment that you would otherwise have undertaken.
Yeah, absolutely. It impacted everything that we did really, but I guess, we all used to do the odd day or two from home, but we didn't ever recruit and onboard somebody start to finish remotely. So everything was impacted. The candidate journey was impacted, the hiring manager was impacted, the processes, the vetting process, we couldn't do the same vetting because we couldn't collect hard copy documents. So everything was impacted. I don't think there was one area that was kind of business as usual, really.
And have any, Georgina, let's take this, of the practical issues that we've just been talking about hung over into the current world? Are there any practical issues that haven't been solved satisfactorily?
I'd definitely say so. So we at Card Factory still kind of struggle with video interviewing and making sure that all candidates have the correct access, that they can get onto the video interviews. We obviously experience technical issues quite a lot. We have created like pamphlets and things that we give to candidates so that they can try and log on, but sometimes we still do obviously face those issues, and I think that still happens at the moment. So we're trying to work out other ways of interviewing, whether that be on the telephone, if somebody doesn't have access to the internet, and then how can we do that so that there's 3 people on it. So we have still got a bit of a way to go with that, I do think, but in terms of other aspects of things that have changed, in terms of like identification, we have kind of overcome those and we're in a bit of a good place.
Okay, we'll come on to talk about the niceties of remote interviews. That's going to be a big area that we talk about. Before we do, Joe, did you have any of these issues arising at Jet2, or was it because of the nature of the business something that literally just stopped?
Yes, I think I'm just trying to think when it all happened time-wise. So everything got sort of put on hold, and unfortunately we were in a position where we had to sort of start withdrawing offers and things like that. So it was sort of being very active in a different way and almost undoing a lot of the work that we did for the sort of the previous months. And then things sort of got put on hold. And then I think obviously having joined Morrison's halfway through the pandemic, I've obviously been there since the start of the journey to see sort of what that's been like. So obviously when I joined, a lot of good practices were already in place. I think we've overcome some of obstacles in terms of like the interviewing, that's absolutely fine. But I think of the other things that are not sort of a risk for us in terms of the identification, because we've been lucky that we are still operating as a head office and we are still open, albeit we're on reduced numbers. So we are still sort of people to come in on the first day, getting their tech equipment, sort of our ID. So the side of things hasn't sort of changed much for us. But the other stuff we've managed to sort out is the video interviews and really get on for that now.
It's really interesting that you should have had the experience of moving roles during the pandemic yourself, and you're also bringing very much to the fore one of the great issues that people have with video interviews, which is connectivity and internet. I'm very sorry for the bad line between where you are and where we are, but I hope that the people who listen to this can make out adequately what you've been saying. Rebecca, can you help us now with the adaptations you made when you realized that this was all going to last for a little while and that recruitment was still going on, had to be done and had to be achieved, and you've got through the technical issues of working out whether somebody's got the right to work in the jurisdiction and so forth. How did you adapt your processes? What was the biggest change that you saw fairly early on in the year of 2020?
Yeah, well, I suppose one thing to mention is I think it's an ongoing process. So I don't think certainly what we put in place, how we were operating 2 months ago has changed to how we operate today. So it's that, I suppose, continuous improvement piece. But I'd say the biggest change, the first biggest change I'd say was the video interviewing, and I think selling this as an idea to stakeholders who may potentially be a little bit nervous going down that route, especially if they, say, for example, had a short assessment they'd like a candidate to complete, which was I don't mean physical, but as in they would arrive in the office and complete the assessment there and then, looking at ways of automating that, looking at providers to help with that. We were already set up with Microsoft Teams, so I suppose we were quite lucky in that respect that everybody knew how to use Teams and were quite familiar with it. And then I would say, I suppose a positive has been the speed that we've managed to move vacancies along at, because we don't necessarily need candidates to now book a day off to travel to the office to meet a team. We can move in some cases quicker than we could previously. And then I'd say the latest change has been around EMIS has moved now to modern working officially. So we are now advertising roles nationally. So positive, I suppose, that's come out of that is the fact that we are not restricted to looking at candidates based around the offices that we've got in the UK, which is predominantly Leeds and Yorkshire. So I'd say that's the latest change that we've adapted to, and then also talking to our suppliers, so job boards, databases, in terms of how we can push adverts out nationally. So I think there's been different changes we've needed to make along the way. Pre-COVID, we had introduced candidate check-in stages. So we highlighted a need to do that because ultimately when somebody joined, up until passing the probation, they didn't have a contact within HR. So we now do staggered check-ins with all new starters, and that's how we've gathered that feedback on onboarding, interview process, to feed that continuous improvement. So although yes, it has been a challenge, I think there's a number of positives that have come out of it as well, in terms of ways of working and how innovative you can be with technology, which I suppose being the core of what we do is a brilliant opportunity for us to see what we can actually put in place as well.
It'll be interesting to look in a moment at the positives that have come from all of this, and there may be more than perhaps people think. But Sarah, from your point of view, does that resonate? Has the video interviewing and the practicalities of that been the biggest item for you?
Yeah, I think it has. I don't think that there's been one huge impact. There's just been a number of smaller ones that we've had to adapt to. So it feels like there's been a big change, but I think it's more just lots of little tweaks. One of the things that slowed down the process a little bit was collecting right to work and ID. We found it all right with interviews. Doing remote interviews, we've not had any major issues there, but yeah, like I say, I think it's just a series of smaller changes that's taken a lot of time rather than individual big impacts.
People who are thinking of moving role might be wondering how they would be perceived online rather than face to face. Have you found the need for extra training or guidance for hiring managers in terms of their assessment of an individual on a screen?
So not the technical interview skills and the types of questions or the way that we carry out an interview, that's pretty much the same as it would have been pre-COVID. It's not something that I've had hiring managers feel uncomfortable with, really. I think where we've had newer managers, especially managers that are new to MPS, we've maybe sat in interviews with them just to support them through the process to make sure that the technology is right and they're familiar with our interview process. That's probably something that we would have done in person anyway. So I think it's translated quite well. But like Rebecca said, it's been a lot easier to organise interviews with candidates when they're not having to book time off work. Yeah. We don't have to book rooms in the office. We don't have to make sure that people can put aside 3 hours to do some interviews. We can literally just slot them into people's diaries as and when. So that part of it has sped up the interview process.
Georgina, is it something that you've found?
Not necessarily, kind of the same as Sarah. Our hiring managers have been really adaptive to the video interviewing process in terms of how we carry it out. They usually always have somebody from the talent team with them on their interview, so we can kind of help spearhead if we feel like it's going off in the wrong direction or if they need a little bit of support. I do think that we have had to have discussions with them just about people's personal settings when they're doing a video interview, because not everybody does have a space where they can have a nice pretty background. Some of them, we have had people where they've just been in the living room, such as Sarah, for example, and we've had to kind of tell some of the hiring managers to be open about where people are and how they are conducting their interview. We had a candidate ask if they told us that their child is in the house because they didn't have any childcare because nurseries were locked down. Is that okay? obviously it's fine, but we talk to the hiring managers just to pre-warn them and let them know that they might see a child. It's life, you know. People are having to do these things at home just as we are, so we need to make sure that we're understanding of people's situations as well. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing that we've talked to hiring managers about. The actual flow has been fine, but it's just kind of understanding people's situations, really.
Joe, have you found that there's been a similar need for making sure that hiring managers aren't almost subconsciously doing something, judging against the wrong criteria in the way that Georgina was just saying they guarded against?
Yeah, I think I think managers have been really active and really supportive of the new process. And I think obviously they've had to be. I don't think we've had to provide them with too much guidance, but I think we've definitely provided guidance to candidates. Obviously, from a candidate perspective, they've not interviewed in a number of years, and this is completely new to them as well. Especially if they're not even if they're not a hiring manager in their current company, they've probably not had experience of this. So just supporting them with around what best practice looks like, tips on how to do a video review, and just down to things like checking your internet connection, your lighting, where you are in the house and things like that. And I think obviously I think a lot of people do prefer video interviews now, but there's still some, even to date, a year later, they've never done one. So I think obviously so many different tools as Google Meet, Zoom, Teams, and it's around guiding them on that particular technologies and making sure they're set up and ready for the interview. Yeah, probably from a candidate perspective than a hiring manager perspective.
And Rebecca, I think you've told us that you were well familiar with Teams beforehand in any event. Was that because you were a decent way down the journey towards flexible working in any event?
In all honesty, no, we just changed provider from Skype to Microsoft Teams. It was late 2019, so we already were quite comfortable using it, and having international offices, we would all be on, they would use that as a function. One thing I've just thought of as everybody's been answering is what I remember doing and the team doing is, if candidates were if it was their first time using Teams, or they were a Zoom user rather than Teams, setting up kind of a test call, especially presenting, so they could get used to how to share their screen properly. And from a hiring manager point of view, some advice that we gave was around just making the interview slightly longer. So if it was an hour, putting in an hour and 10 minutes just for that rapport building that you may do, meeting somebody at reception, walking to a meeting room, or the kind of general conversation you'd have at the end of an interview. So we, to Sarah's point, I suppose they were smaller tweaks that we made through the process, but to make both sides feel as comfortable as possible. And of course, even today we'll have candidates with connection issues or not knowing how to share the presentation, and just thinking of practical ways to overcome that. So if we are asking them to prepare something, do they send it prior, just in case that they can't share it on the interview? So I think everybody's probably well versed in it now that we've been doing it for nearly a year, but they were just some other kind of quick fixes that we had as well.
Did you find that there was any difficulty with making the how do I put it, the more personal judgments that you need to make about team fit? I don't mean the technical ability, I don't mean the answers to technical questions, but the when you're thinking about how somebody's going to interact and work with other members of a team who are known and are fixed in, who are already colleagues, have you found any difference or difficulty doing that on screen rather than in person? Georgina?
I would say we have in certain roles that I can think of off the top of my head, and to kind of overcome that, we've put a second interview in, just more of a coffee chat style rather than a formal question and answer, and it's maybe been about 20 minutes, been with a couple of members of the team, kind of marketed it to the candidate as it's just a second interview to meet the wider team, to have more technical discussions, and we've kind of used that as a way of understanding if people would be good for a team fit and a culture fit, and that has helped in those particular roles that I can think of, especially when they're quite high profile and they have to deal with key stakeholders throughout the business. That's kind of really when we've done that second interview to make sure that they've got the ability to build that rapport with other people in the other departments and things like that.
So moving on to the process post-appointment. Sarah, have you had anybody who has yet to set foot in the office and meet their teammates face to face, even at a distance?
No, short answer. No, so we had a fixed term recruiter join the team for 6 months from the back end of summer last year, and she worked with us for 6 months. We spoke daily on, through virtual means, and she came and left without having met anybody from the organisation in person. So that did feel quite strange. And there's people within the team that, I'm still yet to meet. So we did briefly go back into the office for about 2 weeks prior to one of the lockdowns. I can't remember which one it is now. So I think there was only 1 or 2 new people. So we might have a handful of people that have seen or been to the office. But no, the majority of people have been 100% remote since the day they joined us.
Rebecca, has that been the position at EMIS as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we moved to modern working very quickly over a matter of weeks. The property team worked really hard and really well to get kit out to everybody, whether that was desk, anything they needed to be able to work remotely. But I suppose with the complete change to modern working, unless teams meet in collaboration hubs in the future, I think that will be kind of the future of working for the foreseeable.
So how have you found that you've adapted to an assessment of a new recruit's work during the period of their probation? Rebecca.
Okay, sorry. That wouldn't sit with talent. It would, as far as I'm aware, that process hasn't changed in terms of how somebody's probation period is managed. The time is purely done. The catch-ups and the meetings are exactly the same. They're just done via Microsoft Teams. I'm sure managers would love to meet team members face to face and have that real catch-up, but yeah, collaboration are still in planning, so we'll see how that works out. But yeah, no change really to that.
And on the social side of integration with teams, pre-COVID, they might have gone to the pub or whatever else teams might choose to do. But have you found that you've had to organise things for people, or have they found their own way in the online world? Jo, what do you think of that?
I think people have found their own. I don't think the talent function where sort of that. I think we're doing how we manage to be leading that. Like I said, we've been quite lucky that we have still been able to go to the office. So a lot of people are in maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. So at least being able to meet all of their team and some of their key stakeholders, and being able to social distance to sort of have a coffee with people. And I think that's sort of really important. But we've been trying not to lead it as a talent function, to sort of ask the hiring managers to sort of lead it and set up WhatsApp groups and hangout chats and sort of encourage people to just jump on. And I mean, in the first few weeks, rather than setting up meetings, just setting up ones with the peers and the stakeholders and just having a cup of tea and coffee and talking through what their role entails and getting to know where they sit within the department. I think that's one of the things I found quite hard when I joined, is trying to piece together this complicated organisation and see what structure everyone sits in and what role they complete, and doing all of a video interview. But I think having that first initial catch up and just having a cup and a coffee, it does really help. But yeah, I do feel like we're in quite a lucky situation to be still sort of seeing people face to face as well.
Tangentially to that, looking after people's social welfare in that way is one thing, but it's quite another when one comes to look at mental well-being and mental health. Georgina, how have you found that the organisation has adapted to the new online world in that sense?
So mental health was quite a large thing for Card Factory before the pandemic. So we have mental health first aiders that operate in the warehouses, in retail, in support centre. So somebody always has a peer to go to. And obviously when the pandemic started, they were hugely marketed across all platforms to every individual in the business. They were told how to contact them, who to contact. Obviously everything's anonymous, and we made it easier to contact them as well, so they had email, telephone numbers, so they're kind of the in-house things that we've done. We also have an employee assistance programme which allows colleagues to access counsellors, therapists, and it's a free service, and we've marketed that throughout the pandemic, especially when people are on furlough, and such a large portion of retail, almost 7,000 colleagues, are literally just sat at home, and we understand that that can be having a negative impact on the mental health. So we have things, it's called a weekly roundup, where we put news out to every colleague in the business, and it's always mentioned in there, you know, this is who you need to reach out to if you want to chat, if you want to speak, and how to get that information as well. So we've kind of just amped up what we were doing before, but it's always been a massive thing for us.
Sarah, has that been something that's been high on the agenda at MPS?
Yeah, similar to what Georgina said, it was anyway. And we have the same, we've got mental health first aiders and employee assistance programs and that kind of thing. I think we've kind of found really that this has placed a bigger expectation on line leaders to look after their teams in ways that they probably haven't had to before. So I think in a time when at some point everybody struggled, you know, I think there's added pressure on managers when their circumstances might be challenging as well, just to look out for their teams a little bit more, and their peers as well. So I think as a business, we've kind of just become a little bit kinder, I think, to each other, and a little bit more considerate, and just sort of small things like instead of putting, you know, a half an hour meeting or an hour meeting, we'll put 25 minutes or 55 minutes, just so that at the end you've got time to go and get a drink and just have a breather, so you're not logging off one meeting and, you know, going on to the next. And managers are encouraging people to take their full hour, and if it means a little bit of flexible working, so you can go out for a walk, you know, in the afternoon while it's still light, instead of, you know, logging off and it being dark and then just kind of watching TV and going to bed. I think managers are happy for people to go out for an hour during the day, or, you know, just log in a little bit later so they can go out for a run in the morning, or whatever, just to make sure that people are kind of getting the daylight and the fresh air that they need, that they're getting a break. And where people are homeschooling, you know, we've sort of been really flexible around the people that the hours that people are working to accommodate homeschooling, and just being a bit mindful of not, you know, if you can see that there's somebody's got an hour in their diary and you need an hour of the time, just check in before you kind of make their day back to back, you know. So it's just kind of having a little bit of consideration for people, I think. So that, I guess, the responsibility for people's well-being has become everybody's responsibility, rather than the wider business and, you know, the mental health first aid, as it sits with everybody now.
Rebecca, have you found that that responsibility spread more generally through the business than perhaps it was before?
I think it's always been there. I think to Sarah's point, it's just kind of emphasised it, and that it's everybody's responsibility. There's been a number of kind of creative things that have come from different teams at EMIS. So we do have a Thrive programme which has got all your wellbeing pillars in there. That was alive before the pandemic. So again, just I suppose just pushing out what the business feels is relevant. We do pulse surveys quite often, so we get that kind of rich feedback, so we know what people want to hear. And I think having over 1,200 employees in the UK who are all home based, it's a really hard challenge, I suppose, to you know, put a call into everybody and see what they'd like and how they're feeling. And I think to Sarah's point, line managers, there's different dynamics to their role now, of kind of that whole well-being piece, that you may tell if somebody comes into the office and you see them that they don't seem the normal selves, which over Teams, or if you don't have a call that day, might be really difficult to pull out. So yeah, we did a charity event last year where we had the opportunity for employees who were into gaming, or who maybe weren't into gaming but wanted to give it a try, to meet online in designated time slots to kind of play against each other. So we've tried to get creative with our wellbeing initiatives, because we can't go out and walk the 3 peaks together. So we've kind of celebrity chef, master chef challenges. We've done we just basically listen to the business and see what the interest is, and then push the ideas out that way.
And have you found that there's been a greater or a less, or perhaps the same sort of demand for these sorts of outside of work events and competitions?
I'm not sure about demand. I feel like it's almost been thrust into the spotlight anyway because of COVID and because of home working. So I'm not really sure on demand, but it's certainly higher up on agendas by the feel of things.
Mm. And there seems to be an almost universal feeling that hiring managers have had to take greater responsibility for the well-being of their teams than pre-COVID. Is this something that's been supported, or that's required extra input, extra training, extra HR support, for example? Sarah, have you found that?
No, I think that I guess it depends on the leader. There's a lot of different things, I think, that overlay someone's ability to sort of, the softer skills of management. And there's a lot of different things, there's a lot of different nuances that are kind of coming to light that are making leaders' jobs a lot more difficult. So how do you manage a team of extroverts versus how do you manage a team of introverts? And, if you've got a team of introverts, it's hell to be doing social quizzes, at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. They can't think of anything worse. So I think it's just, it's a very individual thing for each leader. I wouldn't say that as, I don't sit as part of the kind of HR team, but I don't think HR would get involved in a manager's ability to make sure that their team was all right, unless there was some kind of capability there. We have responsibilities that are on our agenda, which is general well-being within the organisation, but we don't get involved on a granular level in managers sort of managing their team. Again, it's just something that the business has looked at as a whole, and it's become everybody's agenda to make sure that we're doing the right thing for people's well-being. So that could be taking ideas from the employee engagement forum. It could be someone just making a suggestion on the internet. It could come from HR. It could come from, so we're open to options. It's uncharted territory, isn't it? We're open to sort of putting anything into play that we think might be beneficial to people.
Joe, you obviously have the experience of being on the receiving end of a lot of the interviewing and onboarding things that we've been talking about. When you were a candidate during the pandemic, how did you find resources available externally? Did you find that there was a lot that you could draw on? Did you need to?
In terms of resources, what going to, sorry,
to cope with the online application process and interview process and onboarding process?
Yeah, I think, I was quite lucky. We only went through sort of one process with Morrison. I think prior to doing that, I hadn't done any video interviews from a candidate perspective. I'd conducted them with candidates who were sort of across the UK and sort of across Europe, sort of used to doing it from a recruitment perspective, but not from a candidate perspective. But we had sort of something called Launchpad, which we could conduct video interviews through. We could set up sort of a guide on what to do. So that was there and sort of available for me as a candidate when I was sort of interviewing with Morrison. But I think looking at sort of externally, I think I don't have too much information available. Wider support on LinkedIn, but I think people just to reach out to talent acquisition specialists, recruiters, their network, and sort of talk to people. And I think that's probably the best sort of advice to give people. I don't know if there's too much support readily available other than from that specific organisation.
Now, in terms of the good that's come out of this, and plainly the bad as well, there's in no sense going to be a case for saying that COVID has been anything other than disastrous for a huge number of people across the world. But in terms of the accelerated change that it's led to within organizations, can you identify, from your point of view, first of all, the single most useful change, the one that's going to be longest lived and provide the best return, that has been, if not caused, then brought about now as opposed to later by the COVID situation? Rebecca first.
Can we go to someone else first? I can't.
Certainly, Sarah.
It depends on what lens you're looking at it from. So I think it depends. Do you mean from a people perspective or from a organisational perspective?
Either. You see both.
So I think from an organisational perspective, you've got now a talent pool that is national, if not international. So whereas we, for whatever reason, previously would have recruited into the Leeds office from an area that was commutable to Leeds, because we don't need that person to be in the office, we're now looking at our policy for longer term remote working and where we can recruit people from. And there's a possibility, and I know a lot of organisations that are doing it already, is that you can work from anywhere, or you can work from anywhere in the world. So where we might have struggled to get certain tech talent or legal talent in the Leeds area, that's going to massively open up our talent pools, so we can bring, you know, more talent into the business. So I think there's, again, organisational, so I think there's a cost to the business, so you don't necessarily have the same overheads you would if you've got offices and meeting space and all of that kind of thing. From a person perspective, I think there is that focus on people's work-life balance, and it touches on a lot of different things as well. So there's, I guess, the impact of parents, you know, single parents as well. So I guess it's just opened up a lot of conversations on who we recruit and how we, I guess, how we treat them, you know, and how easy it is for people to work for us. So I think that's going to have a positive impact on, you know, a lot of people already in the business, but also people that join us in future. I think will be a lot more accessible and inclusive to people as well.
Georgina, have you drawn any lasting goods from this process, from this time?
I think the whole attitude towards flexible working has changed at Card Factory. So with pre-coronavirus, we were pretty much, you work in the office. We barely had anybody who remote worked. It was very few and far between. And those were literally the necessary people to work remote. Everybody else was office based. So I do think a great positive is that it's opened up discussion for flexible working to give people a better working life balance, to make sure that we're that people that work for us have support where they need it. If they need to go to a doctor's appointment, that they can do. Obviously that happened before, but it was a lot more formal. You went to your doctor's appointment, you came back to the office, whereas now you can take the morning at home, you can work from home, or you can have the day. Obviously going forward, we at Card Factory still don't know what we look like in terms of flexible working. It's not yet been fully outlined, but it is a lot more positively thought about. So I just think that is going to be better for the people that already work for us and future employees as well, just because it's obviously a lot better for everyone if they understand and know that they are supported by their business.
Joe, have you found any lasting goods coming from this?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think the whole attitude shift towards sort of flexible working and remote work, I think it's just been positive. I mean, obviously I've been recruited in the tech space for sort of 5 years. I think everyone's always asked that question, and I think all businesses have just been pushed that direction, and everyone proved that they can do it. So almost like we can't go back to what we were doing before. I think just having that sort of flexibility to sort of work different hours, whether that's early, late, whether that's the core business hours. I think it's been a long time coming, and I think everyone's really looking forward to continuing hope as well.
Rebecca.
I think the flexibility piece is probably the biggest. I think the flexible working as well. I think from a selfish kind of recruitment point of view as well, never before if you had to kind of needed to or wanted to look at your process in that much detail. And I think the speed that you can make the changes at and still get the same, if not better, outcome. I think it's quite an exciting time once I look back. Probably at the time it didn't feel hugely exciting, but when you look back and see what you've achieved and what's worked and what hasn't, I think they're all really positive things that you can take forward into your, I suppose, your whole recruitment process as well.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because what I want to ask about really is for you to scan the horizon. We've drawn out some goods. There's the national reach. There's, yes, okay, cost saving, but most importantly, the work-life balance, the flexibility of working, and the approach to that, and the accelerated developing of attitudes towards that within organisations. But we've crammed 5 or even 10 years into one, or perhaps 18 months. When we come out of this, hopefully during the course of this summer, what do you see as the next set of changes that will follow on from the things that we've crammed into such a short space of time? Can you look forward even now?
I'd prefer not to. I think that we've had that much change. I think that to plan more change would probably be quite exhausting for everybody. I think, you know, even just on a daily basis and a weekly basis, and, you know, I think that everybody's just absolutely exhausted. So I think now to, you know, come out of this and think, right, what can we do next, just feels a little bit kind of, it just doesn't sit right with me. So I think we all just need to kind of get used to it, find our feet again, you know, just sort of settle into the ways of working and find a blend of, you know, new sort of ways of doing things, and, you know, what we're going to revert to and what we're going to continue, and, you know, just find that balance and just kind of have a bit of normality for a while before starting to look at more change. I think, you know, as humans, we don't like change. I think we've had enough. So let's just not have any more. Thank you very much.
Georgina, do you echo that?
Yeah, very much so. I don't think, particularly here, I don't think we'll be changing much within the next 12 to 18 months afterwards when we come back to a normal period. Obviously, there's still things that the company do need to decide, such as the stance on flexible working. But once that's kind of outlined, I think people will take the time to really settle into the new ways of working, whatever is decided, before we then look to change the next thing. I definitely echo what Sarah says, no more. Thanks.
Is that the feeling of the panel? Joe, Rebecca?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've gone through so much change, haven't we, in a year? I think the only interesting thing from my perspective, I think it changed to an extent, but I think it's fully changed, is when it comes to like events. Obviously, a lot of things are going online like this, and a lot of them are going to our podcast. I think still with like the big sort of traditional events, job fairs, obviously last year they sort of postponed. So this year it'll be interesting to see actually whether we postpone again, whether they go virtual, and what's happened there. Because I think that's been the only thing for me that I've not seen a huge change. You know, there's obviously like these sort of all the discussions and panel debate and online for the bigger events. It'd be interesting certainly to see what happens. Yeah, everything else I think a lot has been changed. Like, people just need to sort of settle down into a routine and sort of adapt to the new ways of working.
So what you've said actually slightly turns the question another way. Let me ask you this. After this period of almost interim normality, if you like, what is it that you would most like to change back to the way it was? Sarah, do you have a view on that?
I think it's whatever makes people feel more comfortable at work. So giving people that want to work in the office and have that interaction, giving them that option. If people want to return to doing face-to-face interviews, giving them the option. I don't think there's anything that I would sort of say I think we need to go. I think it needs conversation. I think that, again, people have gone through a lot. And I think to just say, right, we're going to switch back to this, it's just too, you know, it's a lot to put people through. So I think any change or anything that we need to go back to needs to be done sort of based on people's wants and needs. And I think that's where we do a lot on, someone mentioned pulse surveys earlier. So I think it's something that we need to make decisions on, the wider voice of the business and what people want and need rather than what the business feels is best.
Rebecca, what's your view?
Same really. I think just having options will be really nice, and almost letting that be steered by the business. In short, options would be lovely.
Georgina, Joe, do you agree with that general view?
Yeah, I think personally for me, I would quite like to return to face-to-face interviews, or at least have a mixture of face-to-face and virtual. So the roles that do require meeting more people, I'd love to go back to kind of face-to-face interviews for them, so that they can meet the team, they can meet the office, they can see the office and see kind of the building. I think it's also important sometimes for candidates, if they are going to be in an office-based role, such as like the service desk in IT, that's mainly an office-based role, that they make the journey to the office, so they can see the commute, they can see how far it is, if it's travelable. So for those types of roles, that personally, I do think I'd like to go back to face-to-face. But obviously having options for other roles would be great.
Joe, your view?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of meeting the needs, I guess, of the individual, and like Lara said, some people want to sort of remain sort of home based, and some people want to go back into the office full time. And I think for me personally, I want a balance of both. Probably 50-50 would be sort of ideal. I think it's just around sort of moving forward, can we meet the needs of the individual and what they want.
So essentially then, after a period of rapid change, we can draw out the good, the increased flexibility, the ease of timetabling, the increased awareness and focus on support for mental health, the greater ease of recruiting across a national landscape, the work-life balance. There's a lot of good to reflect on. But it's that period of consolidation and reflection that the panel, I think, as a whole, is saying would be a good idea before too much else changes. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good place to conclude. Thank you very much to our panelists for sharing those insights and experiences. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear the view from the inside. Rebecca Layton, Sarah Speechley, Georgina Blade and Joe McBride, thank you, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.